I'm going to turn over at the moment to Mark Pesce, and I'm going to ask Annie to do an intro to Mark, who will talk about Australia's longevity opportunities.
We are so lucky to have Mark Pesce turn his attention to this. He is a futurist, he is super well known in Australia and overseas, and my excitement in life now is Mark sending me articles about longevity via text. I've hit the limits of my life. But he also speaks quite a lot at conferences for the financial sector to talk about this issue. So we're very lucky because he's just hot off the heels or on the heels? Hot off the heels of a FIAL conference where he presented recently. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you. Let me.
I'm not sure if Mark, is the mic working?
Is this working? Because I can shout and you'll all hear me, but I think it would be bad for the tape. But I would prefer to sort of roll around. All right. So first off, props to Abby and Annie, because I didn't really know that much about what was going on with this economy, with the longevity economy, until I got pulled in to be on a panel here that they had back in October. And that started a journey. And what I've learned was exciting and terrifying, as you'll soon find out. Do we not have it? Because I don't want to stand behind this. This is not interesting to me. It's not interesting to you. But the first thing I will show you while we're setting this up, while I was preparing a talk for the Fund Executives Association, all right, that's basically the CEOs of all of the industry super funds. And I gave this talk on August 1st. There were $2 trillion of capital in management in the room that day. And I'm going to explain some of what I shared with them. But the thing I started off with was this image, which I'd captured from the New York Times, just the obit. This is just their normal random set of 3 obits for that day, sort of toward the end of July. And you see the youngest person on that list is 99, right? And has that happened before? Probably. Is it going to happen a lot more? Almost definitely. And this gets to be what we're starting to see. This is what the present looks like, because in fact the change is already happening. Now, I'm going to get personal for a second, because when we talk about aging, it's both personal and cultural. It's happening at both levels at the same time. But I'm going to show you the last 3 generations of the Pesces. So we start off with my grandfather. My grandfather made it to age 63. Which, at the time he died in 1971, wasn't particularly out of range for men at that period of time. And then my dad, who died in 2019, made it to 79. Now, as Abby pointed out, if you are well when you're 65, you stand a relatively good chance of making it to 90. Like, better than 50%. Probably a lot better, but we really don't know what the odds are here. And so I'm looking at this going, all right, I'm 61. If I can hold things together for 3 years, I'll get the brass ring, and I'll be good to go until age 90. And in a lot of ways, that's probably how we should be setting our expectations for how we should be behaving as individuals, but also how we should be behaving as a culture. And this brings us to the first thing that I want to point out. There are 3 major opportunities I'll bring up here. The first one is this. What do we need to do to keep Australians well to age 65? There are a lot of reasons. First off, it is a lot cheaper to keep someone well than it is if they're sick, even if they don't live as long. All right? But also those people are going to be happier and more contributing and just better parts of the culture. Now, how do we keep people well to 65? Well, half of this is clearly a public health thing, right? This is why we discourage people from smoking. It's why we want people to drink less if they can. It's why we want people to do physical exercise and go see the GP regularly. We all know these public health messages, and these public health messages are working because life is getting longer for most people. But there are probably a whole bunch of other things that we can think about, both as a culture and as individuals making choices in that culture about how to manage our wellness leading up to 65. And this is where there's an opportunity, because we don't really think in these terms. We think, oh, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. Well, it's like, actually, wait a minute. The whole story here is that we're doing it for ourselves and for our families and for our culture. How can we build not just the social infrastructure, but the commercial infrastructure that can reinforce that? This is the way we might want to be thinking if we get to a place where we want to keep people well to 65. All right, now, some charts. So let's say that people are going to leave on average to about 90, because they're going to make it to 65 and be well. And it's going to be a little bit longer for women and a little bit less for men. Then there's this thing called health span. And health span is basically how long out of that period of time you're well, right? You have basically your full complement of agency and can do things. And for most people, on average, that runs to about 85. All right? By around the time they're 85, something has happened that starts to affect their agency. For instance, I don't know if you saw on the news, Maggie Beer had a fall last week. Broke bones, all right? And we capitalized that. She had a fall because what you can tell with people aging is when they have that first fall, tells you it's a significant indicator of the rest of their lives, all right? So what do we want to do here? What we want to do is we want to identify the gap in a health span and a lifespan, and then throw everything at it that we can to make that gap as short as possible. So, this is why I wanted a microphone, but whatever. That gap right there between health span and lifespan, which will be different from person to person, but it represents the primary opportunity in the longevity economy, because being sick sucks and it's also really expensive, all right? And so if we're going to have more people who are living to their full lifespans of 90, it makes sense for us to build an ecosystem of services and a cultural infrastructure that does its best to extend individual health spans for as long as possible. Now, we don't need to magic things up from the void, although we did discover just this week, because the cardiologists in England published it, that Ozempic, the wonder drug for losing weight, decreases all deaths. Yes, I know, there's a mic drop after that. So I think probably we're all going to be on Ozempic or something similar, semaglutide inhibitor. They don't know exactly why yet, but they know that it's good, all right? And so we have all of these other medicines that actually already exist that will be coming along, but we have to think now about what does it really take to get people to extend their health span? I can hear that. Excellent. There's 3 key elements that have been identified. First of these is that we need to stay as active as we can for as long as we can. And activity means getting out there and walking, but it also means maintaining your balance. The more we get into this, the more we understand that balance is significantly important to maintaining wellness for as long as possible. But you need to be active. You also need to be connected. You need to be with and around other people. A lot of things then mean that people need hearing aids, because in fact cognitive decline is directly correlated to how much language you hear, because there's something about language that keeps our brains going, as you might expect. So there's a whole bunch of things that are around that, but building networks of connected people and let people feel valued and contributing. All right? None of this is weird, but now I'm going to show you 3 images, and I think this whole room is going to giggle, because I'm going to show you 3 images of what that actually looks like in practice. And you won't have ever seen this in this light before. But I'm going to show you 3 people who made it to their late 90s, or in one case, over 100. Oh, wait, I'm going to go one more slide first. All right. Sorry. The second of the longevity opportunities is, what do we need to build in terms of both social infrastructure and in terms of capital infrastructure, businesses, services, to keep Australians active and connected and contributing? What are all of the things? It's funny, because I was at a startup event, I think this year, was talking to someone who's building a network of people who just wanted to go on bike rides together. So they could just message each other, they could go on bike rides. How many things like that should we have to keep people connected and active and contributing? And that wasn't particularly for people who are elderly, it was just for people. But we need to now start to think about what are all of those potential services, products, ways to connect, to stay active, connected, and contributing. Now there's the three people I was talking about. I don't know if you recognize any of them. So here's the thing. The Queen Mother worked until she was about 99. Now, her father lived to 88, so she had reasonably good genes. And the Queen inherited half of those, but the Windsor genes are horrible, right? And Philip, no other Mountbatten had ever lived anywhere near as long as Philip did. He made it to 99. Why? Because they had something to do every day when they got out of bed. They were needed. They couldn't just sort of fade away. They actually had to do it. And it turns out that that is not a bad pattern for your life. Now, none of us are royalty. None of us have the resources of royalty, but that doesn't mean we can't be so integrated, connected, and active and contributing that we have the same burden of responsibility in our lives that helps us thrive for as long as we can. All right. But as I said, we're not all monarchs. And, they had access to resources that we don't have. But I want to point out, the Queen Mother lived half her life before antibiotics had been invented. All right? She was well known for being down with influenza or with pneumonia all of the time back in the 20s and 30s because people got that all of the time. All right. So we've got our lifespan, that 90-year lifespan. Now we come to the thin end of the wedge because I'm going to introduce a new term, the fin span. The fin span is how long you can live comfortably. And you see that gap there? So let me tell you a little story. So again, I prepared this talk for FEAL, for the Financial Executives Association. And I said, that gap is going to see people fall into it, and they're going to disappear without a trace. And the more that I work with these two, the more I am conscious of the danger of that gap. And I told every one of the CEOs in that room that although you will not be responsible for the existence of this gap, you will be blamed for it. Because we have seen our superannuation system as the solution to that specific problem. The problem is superannuation is a one-size-fits-all solution to a culture that is very much not one-size-fits-all. So let me present the second gap. The gap between fin span and lifespan. And this is another primary opportunity in the longevity economy. At the first round table that PrimeLife Partners had, which focused on financial security, you could see every superannuation company in the room trying to get their heads around the fact that people had all this money, which, by the way, they don't want you to withdraw, but they know you're going to. It's the way it is. But they didn't have any plan for how you could withdraw that money wisely. That was all on you as an individual. And frankly, none of us are that smart, because there is no structure to support that wise allocation of resources between fin span and lifespan. And so this is an enormous area. And I think in terms of where the longevity economy ecosystem is going, this is where the money is going to get made. It doesn't look like financial advice as we've known it. It doesn't look like home care as we've known it. It's something new. It's something that's going to be quite specific to an individual's life plan. And again, for the 45-year-olds, it's going to be part of their journey as soon as possible. For people like me, as soon as we can generate this, I'll have this along for the ride, constantly working with me so that my fin span meets my lifespan. Because we're going to run into all sorts of problems here. The first problem, can I talk about the 2030 rent problem? So the first problem we're going to have, there are about 30% of over 55s rent. Half of those will be unable to afford rent in 2030. So you're talking about a homeless population of seniors, what, 500,000? 400,000 homeless seniors. That is baked into the numbers right now because of this gap. So this is the third longevity economy opportunity, all right? We have to work on developing both the social infrastructure and the economic infrastructure, the products and services that will grow fin spans to meet our lifespans. Otherwise, you're going to have a growing mass of an aging population who will be, in some sense, out on the street. We don't want that. A, it's expensive, and B, it's just going to be ugly. All right, what does life look like by 2050? Now that we're all living 90 years, we actually get to plan our lives a little bit differently. And so there's basically three general patterns of life. The first 30 years or thereabouts, and none of this is set in stone, is your learning phase. You're learning about relationships, you're learning about economics, you're learning about society. And then, and it will be true broadly for most of the people in the room, those next 30 years are your earning phase. These are the years you're going to be putting your career into place, your money aside for that last period of life, and building the networks that will be supporting you through that entire period. And then finally, and this is the phase transition, which we don't really make right now, because basically people retire at 57 and then what happens? Who knows? And people do, by the way, on average retire at 57 in Australia. Then we enter into the returning phase, where people are taking their skills and they're facilitating, they're guiding, they're exemplifying. And of course, we'll go back and forth between all of these, but these are the larger class stages of our lives as we hit the 2030s, 2040s, 2050s. Now, this raises some questions. You know that Joe Biden decided not to run last week. I personally, and I'm just going to make a statement here, wish Clover had made the same decision. I love Clover, but 20 years is more than enough. And so we need to start to think about how to modulate the fact that people who are living longer and have gotten to the top will need to find a way to ease themselves away from the levers of power that they've spent an entire lifetime getting to, so that organizations have the capacity to renew. That is a social question. We need to build that. If we can build a term of life for them which makes them vital as contributors, then it won't feel like so much of a loss to them. So this is part of just what we need to think about as we manage this transition, because that's already happening. We can see that. The whole Biden thing this year is that writ large. And the last thing I need to say is, this is already happening. And this is a lovely quote from William Gibson: the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Your mom is an example of that, all right? We already know, because many people in this room will absolutely live past 90, so we need to start thinking in these terms. We need to start thinking about lifespan and health span and how to make those as close as possible. We need to think about lifespan and fin span and bring those up to equity. Thank you.